Posso assumir que a gente já tá ao vivo aqui, Thales?
Eu tô com o meu YouTube
Ótimo.
e ele ainda.
Beleza, o Thales me mandou uma mensagem aqui já falando que a gente tá, então, bom dia a
So
todos.
we are live on YouTube now. Good morning, everyone.
Presença, pela participação.
Thank you so much for
Meu nome é Filipe Recch,
taking the time to participate. My name is Filipe Recch. I will introduce myself shortly. We're just waiting a couple more minutes so we have more participants connected to the channel and to the panel.
a gente já tá
But
ao vivo
we are already live on YouTube,
então,
which is really exciting.
queria agradecer
And
muito todo mundo que está
I really appreciate
aqui acompanhando
the audience
esse debate conosco.
participation and for you
A
to
gente já está com
participate in
público
our
legal,
debate with us.
de
So we
participantes,
have um,
mas
quite a few attendees joining us, but we're going to wait another moment before we jump into our conversation so everyone has the opportunity to connect and settle in.
muito bem. Então, para mim aqui são
Very
9
well. So
5 aí no Brasil,
now it's 10:05
são
in
1
Brazil.
na
I
Europa,
believe it must
tá
be
bem espalhado.
1:05 in the
Para o
UK
pessoal chegar, é todo mundo
as
chegar
we're
mais rápido,
scattered
então
over the globe. But let's wait
coisa rápida.
another moment so everyone joins us.
Então, desculpa. É, já que 5 minutos, acho que já deu para todo mundo chegar, vamos
So,
começar.
5 minutes in, I believe everyone's had time to settle in. So, officially now, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here and participating in our event. It's a great honor to be mediating this debate on such an important topic, which is education for early childhood. My name is Felipe Reck, and I'm a postgrad. Uh, I'm in the postgrad program for the Lehman Foundation and doing research on the Brazilian government within BSG. And we are a very international group, as you can see. I'm in the United States at the moment, and Clare is in the UK with her team, and we have lots of participants in Brazil. So, from all corners of the world, we have participants here. Now, before we get started, I'd like to really thank you so much for being here. For us, it's an honor to be participating in the debate for public policies and their implementation in Brazil. I'd like to thank the work group, the early childhood work group, especially Priscila, who's the reporter of the GT, of the work group, and CEO of Todos pela Educação. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity and I will introduce everyone very shortly because if I were to say everything everyone's done in their lives, we would be here all day long just with the introductions without a panel. So I'll be brief. I'd like to thank Paulo Pereira, who's the executive secretary for the Ministry of Institutional Relationships in Brazil, and Priscila Cruz, who's the CEO of Todos pela Educação movement, and she's part of the work group on early childhood and the Council for uh, Sustainable Social and Economic Development. I'd also like to thank Danyel Lyman, who's a subsecretary of social programs, transversal areas, and multi-sectorial uh, areas for social participation in the National Planning Secretary. And we have other guests such as Laísa Lima, who's a guest, and she's a master in public policies through the Blavatnik School of Government and the University of Oxford. She held a scholarship through the Lemon Foundation at BSG, and she worked with us in the Lemon Foundation program. Laísa is the author of the policy document, Children Education, State Capacity, Vulnerability, and Allocation Criteria in Brazil. So she's developed that work throughout her internship with us throughout 9 weeks. So this is an excellent product for such a short period of time for the study. It was very rewarding to see the repercussion the document has had so far. And she developed this document with us there. So thank you very much, Laísa, for making yourself available to be here. I'd also like to introduce Maria Tereza de Moraes, the Municipal Secretary of Education of the city of Londrina in the state of Paraná. Clare, just so you know, Paraná is a state in the south of Brazil. And we have Clare, who's going to be talking to us. She's the Vice Dean for Academic Affairs and Professor of Economics and Public Policy in the Blavatnik School of Government, and she's a member of the University College. Great part of her research is focused on educational policies, careers, and fostering initiatives in the public sector. And she is with us because she's the academic director for the Oxford Hub for Global Education. It's a program with a focus on studying the implementation of educational policies in several contexts, and she will share some of her experience with us. With all the introductions made, everybody who knows is here now, so I'm going to give the floor to Priscila and Paulo. Thank you, Filipe. I'd like to greet you all and say it's a pleasure to be with you, Filipe, Clare, Laísa, Maria Teresa, kicking off our debate, which I'm sure will be very productive. I'd also like to say hi to all of my friends from both sides of the Atlantic. And that's one of the nice things about early childhood education, this capacity to engage people from different parts of the world and participate in the debate. And now I'm going to give the floor to Priscila. If I were in your shoes, I would be looking forward to hearing from her instead of me. But I just wanted to add a remark as to why I'm here, which is representing the importance that this theme has acquired for the Brazilian government. I am pleased to be a secretary under Minister Padilha, and we are part of this council. And because it's a long name for the council, we just call it the Big Council. It's a way to refer to it. And the Big Council, for those who don't know, is an organization directed by the Presidency of the Republic, directly through President Lula. And the president chooses social leaderships from the business world, from the activism world, to assist him. So he picks these prominent voices in society on different topics so that he can hear from them how the government should go about conducting some of these strategies. Priscila is one of the most active uh, participants in the council, and in this process this year, participants brought to us over 80 proposals of topics the council should address. And out of the 80, the executive secretary and the minister chose 5 topics, among which there is early childhood. And Priscila has been working on this for a long time, engaging the government from the presidency to other layers of the government. We see lots of ministries getting involved, thinking about what else could be done for early childhood education in Brazil. And now we are realizing the complexity of what we experience, because on the one hand, the last years, if we look at the past 20 to 30 years in Brazil, it's a promising landscape we're looking at, thinking about policies made for early childhood and education and healthcare, social welfare, and so forth. On the other hand, it's such a challenging topic that the existence of these policies in and out themselves will be limited if we don't know how to better manage them. And this is the work this early childhood group has been doing in a brilliant way. We are looking at the entire menu of actions and initiatives from all spheres of the government and say, what else can we get from this? How can we better integrate policies? And for those friends who are speaking from England, we're talking about a continental dimension country. It's an enormous country geographically speaking, and also in terms of public services in some areas. But there are other regions that suffer with poverty and scarcity of resources. So how do we articulate the policies at the municipal, state, and federal levels, which is also how our government branches are organized, in a way that keeps the quality of these policies and actually serve the Brazilians who need it the most? This is the task that the early childhood group is proposing to tackle, to show the president improvements in the policy design that could cause a positive impact in real life of real Brazilians. So Priscilla will address this topic much better than I can, but what I would like to say is, first of all, President Lula, Vice President Alckmin, and the ministers involved with these policies will make this government a government for early childhood. This topic is very central in Brazil, and I take a lot of pride in that because a lot of it comes from the work done by Priscilla and the council advisors. The government has been shifting its priorities in order to give more attention to these challenges. At the same time, these challenges are major challenges. We cannot pretend we don't see their real magnitude and complexity. The government needs to improve its management capacity, its funding capacity as well, so that in spite of these contributions, there's still a lot to be done. So this is all for me. I really appreciate you participating in the webinar, and I just wanted to give you um, this perspective from inside the presidency. We need help from the civil society to find creative ways that can be turned into practice, that can be put into practice to serve the population of Brazil who needs it the most. Thank you very much. Have an excellent event.
Obrigado, Paulo.
Thank you,
Vou passar a palavra
Paulo.
para a Priscila aqui.
I'm going to give the floor to Priscilla. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Filipe, for the invitation and the partnership with Blavatnik School of Government. It's such an honor, and it's going to be a very productive session to hear all of you experts, secretaries, people who are working hands-on with early childhood in Brazil. And I'd like to greet Secretary Paulo Pereira because he's been a great partner for this work done in early childhood. A good government is a government that's tuned into what society says. And it's also important to hear feedback from the government and see that they have people willing to work together and thinking about ways to make it better. So I really appreciate it, Paulo. This idea that our work is just for foreigners to see the good job we do, that's not the way it is here. We are actually conducting very sound work, coordinated between the civil society, experts, academia, and we have Secretary Maria Tereza, who does amazing work in Londrina, her city. So to hear from all of you is going to be essential for us. And it's important to say that everything we discuss during this session, not only will it be incorporated into the report, which is made by Todos pela Educação, along with the Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal Foundation. So it is written by several hands, several members of the work group within the big council, as we call it here. This conjoint work will resort a lot to our discussion here. And there are many reports out there, but to turn a report into public policy is something else. And I will go out on a limb and say the public, more than public policies, Brazil needs to put them into practice. We have very good practices, good experiences, locally speaking, and a lot of people discussing and proving the importance and the impact of care with our early childhood and its repercussion throughout the country and the development of each individual citizen. But we're still lacking this additional step, which is beyond integrating everything that federal, municipal, and state governments already do for early childhood, to shake things up and bring in new elements that will allow these children to really count on care and service for their development, cognitively speaking, physically speaking, socially speaking. So there's no better investment than that. Investment means management time, good management, additional resources, and a lot of integration and governance. Like Paulo said, it's a lot of work. If it weren't so complex, it would have been done already. But what makes us very optimistic is what Paulo said, that willingness of the government to embrace the cause, just like the big council back in the day and other editions, had a kickoff for the quotas law. Now, the policies for early childhood may become one of the biggest deliveries from the big council for the development of the country. We understand there are some values that are inverted. There is a lot of investment for adults. The older they are, the more investment they get, and very little investment for children. We have to shift that mindset, and that requires coordinated efforts. It's not just a matter of one policy to work well at the end. It depends on multiple parties to implement these policies and have an articulated perspective of the implementation chain. And it all starts with good design. And this design of public policies, and these is almost the end of my speech. The work we do in the big council's work group starts on a few assumptions brought in by the presidency of the republic and also by other members of the council, other advisors, because of this value attributed to early childhood policies. The first assumption is this is a national policy. A national policy is a federal government policy, but it's also applied throughout the state and municipal administrations. So there is an interfederative governance and close alignment of all the entities in the federation because children are in a municipality and we have federal policies, we have state policies for early childhood as well, and municipalities have lots of attributions on early childhood, but we need a national policy, not a municipal policy regimen. Another assumption is we must have an integrated policy for the federation. There's this expert in early childhood who said once, policies for early childhood are already integrated, but they're integrated by mothers, by families. It's up to families to integrate them. So to enroll them in child care centers and then vaccination and welfare and
precisa
going to
ler,
a
né? A
library
importância
because
da
their
leitura
kids
para a
need to
contação de
read. The
histórias,
mothers know
ela
the
não é
importance of
rica, né?
reading for their children. So
Esse
it's up
esforço
for
de
mothers to make
integração
all this effort
e
to
o
integrate
governo
these
precisa
policies.
ajudar essas
And the
famílias a
government
migrarem
must
essas
help
políticas, até
these
porque
families
é pela
integrating
integração
these
que a gente
policies because
consegue
it's
que cada
through
uma delas seja
integration
muito mais
that we can make
potencializadas. Então,
each
a
one
ideia de
of them to
integração, ela
go
é
even
muito
farther.
importante e é uma
So the
premissa desse
idea of
trabalho.
integration
Uma outra
is very
premissa
important.
é uma
Another
política
assumption for this
pró-equidade.
work is a
É uma política que tem que.
pro-equity
Aí é a nossa
policy.
formulinha que a gente tem obsessão, né,
And
Paulo? É
it's a
dar mais para
formula
quem tem
we're
menos.
obsessed with.
A gente
We want to
precisa de
give
uma
more to
política que
those who
olhe
have
mais
less.
para as crianças que
We
estão
need
em
a
situação de
policy
maior
that looks more
vulnerabilidade, de maior
at
pobreza,
children who are
porque são justamente
vulnerable
essas que
in
não têm
poverty because
acesso
these
às
are
melhores
the
creches,
children who
à
lack
biblioteca
access to
pública, a
childcare,
teatro, a
public
cultura, a
libraries,
esportes,
to
enfim, tudo aquilo que
culture,
vai
theater,
compor o
sports,
conjunto de
everything
repertórios
that
para que essa
make up
criança
the
consiga se desenvolver
repertoire
em tantas
for that
dimensões.
child to develop
Uma outra
him or
premissa, acho
herself
que
in
essa
all
foi esse
dimensions.
foi um pedido do
Another
povo Lula,
assumption
é que a
is
gente já
this
tenha um
was requested
componente
by
forte de
President
governo
Lula that
digital.
we have a
Essas são
strong
crianças que
digital
já
government
nascem com
component.
essa nesse
These are
ambiente, nesse
children
contexto,
who are
né, nesse
born into
universo do
this
digital.
context, this
Então,
universe, which
pensar
is
que o
digital.
governo digital
So we
pode
have
ser
to
uma
think
grande
that
ferramenta e tem
digital
potencial de
government
ser
can
uma
be
grande
a great,
ferramenta
has the
de
potential
integração
to be
dessas
a great
políticas, é algo que a gente
tool to
precisa
integrate these
levar muito em
policies.
consideração.
And
Acho que a
this is
Levânia levou
something
muito a
we
sério
must
esse pedido do nosso
take
presidente da
into account.
República.
We are
Uma
deeply
outra
considering that
premissa
request
é
made by the
comunicação com as
president.
famílias.
And another
É
assumption is
muito comum a
communication
gente
with
dizer isso, né?
families.
Os
It's
governos
very
falham
common
na
for us to say
comunicação,
this.
mas é
Governments
muito
fail in
comum nesse
communications.
tipo de
And this is
política
a
que é
very
complexa,
common conclusion because
multidimensional, que
this
tem uma
type of policy
série
that's
de
complex,
mecanismos que precisam trabalhar de
multidimensional,
forma
with
coordenada.
several
A gente precisa de
mechanisms
uma
that need
boa
to
comunicação
work
com
in
o
an
parceiro
integrated way.
principal
If we lack the
dessa política, que
communication
é a
with the
família,
main
a gente vai falhar.
player in
Então
this policy, which
precisa ter
is
mecanismos
families,
muito
we will
eficientes,
fail.
fortes
So
e
we must
poderosos de
have
comunicação e
powerful,
troca com
effective
essas famílias.
communication
A
tools
família e a
with
política tem
these
que
families.
ficar o tempo inteiro nessa
Families
parceria,
and
nessa troca para
policies
poder
must go
dar
hand in
certo aquela
hand
criança.
so that the policies
Tem
will
que
work
ser
as expected
uma
for children.
política que seja
And we
brasileira, no
must
sentido assim,
have
a
a
gente
policy that's
pode e
Brazilian.
deve aprender com o mundo inteiro.
We
Mas
can
certamente
and
será uma
must
política
learn
com o
from
DNA
the whole
brasileiro.
world,
É uma
but we must
política
come up with
que a
a
gente
policy
acredita e a gente está
that
inclusive
has a
levando isso para o
Brazilian
G20, né,
DNA.
Paulo?
We've
É uma
been
política
bringing
que
that
pode
into
levar
the
o Brasil
G20
a
discussions too.
mostrar a sua
This
cara
policy can
enquanto um
actually
país que cuida da infância e cuida
allow
do
Brazil
seu
to
jeito.
show
É
itself
do
as a
seu
country that
jeito
takes care of its
carinhoso, do seu
children
jeito
in its
acolhedor,
own
do seu
way, in
jeito
its
olhando para aqueles que
warm
mais
way,
precisam.
its
E
embracing
existe
way,
um jeito
looking at
brasileiro
those
de
who
cuidar
are
das
most
crianças
in
que a gente
need.
também
So
quer
there is a Brazilian way of
a essa
taking care of
política. E por
children that
fim,
we
aqui eu
want
encerro,
the
tem
policy
que
to
ser uma
represent.
política que
And
includa o
at
jovem.
last, it
Mais uma
must be a
política que
game
faz uma
changer
mudança
policy.
pequenininha, é
More
só um
than just a
detalhe,
policy
é
that
só
works on a
de um lado
detail
da
that
pinta, fazer
improves a
um
little
capazão
bit of
naquilo que
something,
existe, botar num
or that's
guarda-chuva, isso não
just
vai fazer diferença.
another piece of the puzzle,
A gente
that's
vai
not going to
fazer mais
make
do
a whole lot
mesmo,
of
isso vai trazer
difference.
mais do
We're going
mesmo,
to
isso aqui
be doing
juntando
more of the
no balaio.
same.
Isso não vai dar certo e a gente
This is
precisa
not the
mudar o
way to
jogo. E para
go,
mudar o
and
jogo, a
we
gente vai
need
precisar
game-changing
de todas
policies.
essas
And for
inteligências que
that,
estão
we
aqui. Então,
need
eu
the
agradeço
intelligence that
demais
we
a
gathered
participação
in
de
this room
vocês,
today. So I really
especialistas,
appreciate you
pesquisadores,
participating,
secretários,
all the
pessoas que estão
experts,
ali
academics,
conectadas com o
and
governo,
secretaries who
conectadas com
are
a realidade do
connected to the
Brasil,
government
conectadas com a
with
realidade
the
nesse
Brazilian
resgate das
reality
crianças,
and the
porque é isso que
reality
vai
of
fazer com que a
children in
gente
Brazil,
consiga
because
ter
that is
esse
what will
desenho
allow
que
us
depois vire
to
uma
come up
política
with this
pública muito
draft that
poderosa
will
para o
be
Brasil.
turned
Então,
into
muito obrigada,
powerful public
Filipe,
policy for Brazil.
Blavatnik, todos os
So thank
secretários
you
aqui
very much,
presentes,
Filipe,
especialmente para você, Paulo.
Blavatnik, all the secretaries, especially
Vamos mudar
Paulo.
esse Brasil aí pelas
Let's
crianças.
go
É a ferramenta
together.
mais
Let's work
poderosa que a
together
gente tem para
for
mudar o
these
Brasil. Muito
children. This is
obrigada.
the most powerful tool we have to change Brazil. Thank you very much.
Obrigado, Priscila.
Thank
Ótima
you,
fala. Eu acho que
Priscila, for your
é muito bom ver o quanto que tem
very
alinhamento
important
da
words. It is great
importância,
to
não
hear
só nesse
that
tema
we are all
da
aligned when
educação
it
e primeira
comes
infância,
to
mas
these
tem
discussions
outros
on
temas
early
que você mencionou,
childhood.
como integração,
And you also
equidade,
talked about
que são componentes
integration,
que são
equity,
muito
equality. These are
centrais para a
terms
gente no Lema Foundation
that are
Program.
also at the very core of what we do. And it is a great opportunity to be here with you and to have these discussions. I worked for 4 years in the Secretariat of Education of Minas Gerais State, and also with Vivian. Hello, Vivian. Good evening, greetings. With integration, municipalities at the municipal level, through coordinated policies, to develop public policies in Brazil also takes me back to what Paulo just shared. We have these 3 different federal levels that we must integrate. So when it comes to equity, well, this is something Laísa will be also sharing with us in more depth. And it is a great privilege to be part of this discussion. And for more context, I would like to share how we first began working with this agenda. We know that we are now reaching the end of our cycle. We are focusing on early childhood and the challenges that we face to achieve our goals. And now we are having discussions about the new framework, and it is timely to begin talking about the new goal we want to define and to focus on the strategies that we're going to adopt in the new Brazilian National Education Plan, PNE for Portuguese acronym. So we started to collaborate with Laísa early on. She did her internship at the Lemon Institute, and we seek to support small cities, small municipalities to organize their enrollment processes in childcare centers and to focus on equity, to focus more in need, to provide them more access to the system. Please bear with me one moment.
Deslize aqui, eu tenho que pedir desculpa. No meu programa aqui estava errado. Eu refiz. Desculpa, eu acabei pulando o Danyel no que eu ia passar aqui. Então,
Sorry.
eu vou voltar pro Danyel Lima. Mas deixa eu só terminar de falar o que eu estava falando. Mas agora que eu percebi que eu acabei pulando.
So as I was saying, and I skipped something here. Please bear one more second with me.
Eu já estava pulando lá para frente, mas
I skipped some slides, so
desculpa. Então, peraí. Então eu estava falando isso.
I was saying that this is precisely what Laísa will be sharing with us in depth. We're talking about our goals for early childhood education, and we are also talking about the goals for 2024-2027.
Esse tema também está permeando esse documento, né? Então eu vou passar
So here we have a document.
Danyel Lima, para ele falar pouquinho desse processo.
Danyel Lima will now share more about this process.
Desculpa, Danyel, pela
Apologies, Danyel.
Agradeço, bom dia a todos.
Thank you so much. Good morning to all. I will be brief. I would like to share, well, what our pluriannual structure consists of and how it's related to early childhood education. I'll begin by saying that we have this pluriannual framework that we inherited from the previous government administration, and it's something we are reviewing right now at a federal level in the planning national secretariat that was in place until January last year. It was reshuffled. Now we have ministers in charge of planning and the pluriannual plan, looking at the different requirements that we have now with President Lula's government administration. And this is very much in line with all that Priscila and Paulo have shared. The pluriannual plan is designed to be a contract, an agreement seeking results between the civil society and the government. We have the National Plan for Education, which was enacted into a law, it is an act, and the pluriannual plan encompasses the government, the federal government by large. Therefore, it is a privileged forum for multi-stakeholder discussions, the implementation of public policies, for the debates to be held through, of course, particular governance systems, meaning that in the current pluriannual plan structure, we have cross-cutting agendas. Children and adolescent agenda is not something new for this pluriannual plan. What is, in fact, new is that today this has been enacted. The agenda has been enacted. It is a law. It has become a law. It is not simply different reports that were put together over time. And in this law, it is stated that policies for early childhood, not specifically for education, but policies for early childhood will also be laid out in this cross-cutting agenda for children and adolescents. Therefore, as part of this governance system, which extends beyond a report, it is actually a space for governance, for public policies, for particular audiences, children and adolescents, women. Well, we have 5 different streams. These streams, these agendas are actually spaces for governance, where we will hold debates on the results we want to attain for early childhood and for all the other groups that are part of the cross-cutting agenda. Now, on early childhood education per se, we worked on the pluriannual plan, as Filipe shared. We actually were concluding, we have concluded the goals for the Brazilian National Education Plan, but we had no references, previous references for the previous goals. The PNE goals for the PPA goals in the past. And what's happened now in this period, 24-27, the Ministry of Education extrapolated the goals. So there was one first exercise, so to speak, to design the first plan for a shorter period of time until 2027, considering some goals. We're looking at goal number 1 in this case, and it's challenging to attain the results that were agreed in the Brazilian National Education Plan. So this plan is already in place. It is in effect, 24-27 plan. President Lula has approved this law. We have now the pluriannual plan has been enacted. We're designing the governance structure, how it will be managed, reviewed, deployed, enhanced. And what I can say for now in regards to early childhood education plan is that it will maintain the structure that is prescribed in the Brazilian National Education Plan for 0 to 3 and 3 to 5-year-old children, with goals that will be applied by 2027. I don't mean to bore you with loads of technical information, but the Ministry of Education expects to attain the PNE goals, 50% from 0 to 3 years of age by 2027. Still, well, looking at the national plan, the national goals, and the ministry has reviewed these goals, these objectives. It is a nationwide goal. By 2027, these 50% should be fulfilled. with major, however, particularities, regional needs, and we would have the lowest percentage of care in the south, in the northeast and the southeastern portion of the country has the highest rate. We want to, for the other regions to, of course, get better and reach something close to 50%. And the national goal for schools is to attain almost 100% of universal service with a pluriannual plan. And well, I'm sharing all of these things as we are working on this plan. The discussions for the new Education National Plan are still being discussed, are still being considered, and these goals might change going forward throughout the process, depending on the approval for the Brazilian National Education Plan and the goals that will be defined for the upcoming years. The pluriannual plan is something that is flexible, that it can be reviewed annually, and the government should accelerate these goals and provide us with the budget to proceed, and the goals, of course, might advance faster. I would like to point out, finally, in concluding, sorry, I know we're pressed for time, but I would like to say that we have planned to build 2,500 childcare centers as part of the pluriannual plan. This is the goal we have now for 2024, but the PAC has already made a pre-selection of over 1,000 childcare centers. And this first wave of selecting municipalities, over 3.2 billion reais, is the budget, as a budget that will be allocated. This is not the budget, actually, it's not the full budget once the government engages in this relationship with on-lending structures. It's not made up front. It is a gradual process, and they have to go through the different stages of the construction works, and then all the childcare centers will be delivered. And still on the budget, childhood education is something that is under the childhood education program. It had only 2 budget actions in the past. The structure is now under the basic education program. In the Ministry of Education, it is part of the basic education, so to speak. And now the Ministry of Education, therefore, controls this program as well, which does not mean that things have changed for the worse, quite the contrary. And both budget actions are still in place for education. From 2023 to 24, we had a 50% increase in focusing early childhood education with these 2 actions, focusing on childcare center construction, 25 above the previous year, 25% above the previous year, and we hope this will further accelerate going forward and even increase depending on how the construction work goes. Thank you very much. Sorry for running over time. And it's a pleasure to be here in these discussions with this group. Thank you, Filipe. Thank you, Danyel. Apologies for my confusion because I changed things around slightly as I was speaking. But yes, a very timely and important discussion about planning, execution, and the relations among the three government branches, the integration. So these are very important discussions. If we bear in mind that early childhood education is a responsibility of all of these levels. And this kind of support is very important, and it's great to see that it's also part of the plan and to have you here in these discussions with us. I will now turn it over to Laís. But first, I should inform you that you can submit your questions in the Zoom Q&A icon. And I see some of you, Professor Claudia Costin is here today. She surely does not remember me, but I remember her. Laura is also here working with early childhood education, childhood education. This is an amazing team. Thank you all for joining us today. So please send your questions in the Q&A, and we will try to answer all of them by the end of our presentation of the lectures. Filipe and I will be selecting the questions, and we will ask you to open your microphones to ask your questions yourselves to our lecturers, to our speakers. So I will just ask you to be brief once you ask your questions, okay? Orally. Laísa will now have the floor. Laísa has 12 minutes. And I will let you know when your time is up. Thank you very much, Filipe, for your kind introduction.
It is an honor to be here with so many people that I admire and inspire me every day to come up with effective public policies for our country. As Filipe was saying, I developed my research and my summer internship in the SBG through the Lima program, and he was actually my mentor. And I assume how anxious you are to share these results. And there is a long title for my research, but we are analyzing the priority criteria in childcare systems in Brazil. I will be sharing a few slides, and Filipe, you can you let me know everything is being displayed correctly? Yes? Okay. So here's the context that led me to think about this theme for my research. Filipe already brought up the goals for the National Education Plan, but we were in 2023, and there was still a long way to reach the 50% goal for children from 0 to 3 years old enrolled in childcare systems. And now we see 41% of these children are there. There are still 900,000 children to go, so it's a long way. We also have the municipal elections this year, which is another opportunity for us to think about and restructure local policies, and also the prioritization of a debate in the National Congress as to the prioritization of childcare in Brazil. And there are lots of bills, some of them establishing specific criteria for all municipalities to follow, but there are also bills that say municipalities should create their own prioritization, obeying socioeconomic criteria. And why are we talking about prioritizing? Not only is there difficulty in access and reach of the National Education Plan, access to childcare is not equal. And the Maria Soto Vidigal Foundation, who inspired my work, has a study saying that over 50% of the 25% wealthiest children in Brazil are enrolled in childcare, but less than 25% of the 25 poorest children are enrolled in childcare systems. And this has to do also with gender and their family structure. So we go into depth for the final report into that. But when we look at the lack of capacity, state capacity to serve the municipalities, we get worried about how to reach these children who need it the most. And we are thinking about human resources and financial resources necessary for that. There is a concentration of the GDP in some municipalities in Brazil, and there's a great complexity to deal with such a large dimension country with over 5,500 municipalities with so many particularities. So we need to think about how we will reach the most vulnerable children who are most in need of these services with the current state capacity we have. We cannot expand the state capacity at a blink of an eye. We need a planning process and a long and medium term. But if we only think about the medium and long term, we're not going to be looking at the current generation of children. We're neglecting them. And that is why we talk about the need of to look at these children now. And that's why I bring up the Maria Soto Vidigal Foundation, so that we can look into this share of the population. And they realize that children from 0 to 3, over 40% of these children could be considered vulnerable. So throughout the study, we're talking about prioritization, which is a process that must be concomitant with the creation of policies in general, and we should reflect about the quality of the service being provided. So we think about a policy that's designed to serve the current generation of children. So working with several experts and researchers, I came up with two key questions. First, what does it mean to prioritize the capacity of childcare centers for municipal managers? We must think about prioritization because we are moving in a more homogeneous way in terms of that in academia, in the third sector, but I wonder what municipalities were thinking about this theme to prioritize them. And I'm not bringing any success cases. Secretary Maria Tereza will bring you a success case, but I'm actually bringing a general analysis of the situation in Brazil when it comes to prioritizing child care services. And the second question is how to structure a prioritization policy in municipalities. So what does vulnerability mean in each municipality? At the same time, we need to provide them with guidance. We understand that each municipality has their own particularities, so it's not an easy answer to such a complex question, given the Brazilian scenario. And to address these questions, we split the study in two steps. Step 1 and 2. Step 1 was based on interviews. I've interviewed municipal secretaries and enrollment officers in 6 municipalities in Brazil, at least one in each region of Brazil. These municipalities were small-sized or medium-sized, no capital cities, and they had some policy for enrollment, not necessarily just for childcare. In step 2, we analyzed the criteria documentation for prioritizing in municipalities that had it in place. So some municipalities had a prioritization system in place, and there are also the state capitals that have a prioritization system for childcare centers in place. And I looked at the capitals mostly because of the easy access to documentation. And then the discoveries of this study throughout these two steps are these. First, in the first step, by talking to municipalities, we understand that before talking about childcare, it was very important to talk about the enrollment process in each municipality. For the prioritization criteria policy to have the effect we expected, there must be a legitimate, transparent process through systematization of enrollment process. In a second step, I've also noticed there was a possible dichotomy between the prioritization and universalization of the child care center's capacity. And in third place, I've noticed a shift in the service provided from full-time service to part-time service to meet the demand due to the judicial pressure on municipalities. And that brings up a reflection about quality of this service. So we're reaching the goal, but what's the quality of what we're delivering? In the second step, where I analyzed the documentation for enrollment in municipalities, I've identified 38 factors used as vulnerability criteria. Some of the factors were overlapping between municipalities. For example, the enrollment in the Bolsa Familia welfare program. But with so many factors, that shows us the complexity it is to define vulnerability in the context of each municipality. And that was a universe of just 7 municipalities. And there are some criteria that are contradictory within municipalities, and the difficulty in proving vulnerability because they have different methods for the criteria. Some of them have a score methodology for the criteria to assess the vulnerability of a child. And ultimately, I've also observed a certain fear as to the transparency of this process and visibility to it versus the LGPD, which is the legislation for data protection in Brazil. So putting these two steps together, at first, we go back to that idea that in order to have an efficacious policy for prioritization of childcare services, we need to think about the enrollment process to give transparency to this process. And I've organized municipalities in 4 profiles. The first profile has a decentralized enrollment process. The second, it's centralized without a waiting list. And the third profile, it's centralized with wait list, but no prioritization criteria. And the fourth profile is the full system that's centralized with wait list and prioritization criteria. Based on the particularities of each enrollment system for each municipalities, they will realize what is the next step to mature their policy for prioritizing childcare service access. So I won't extend myself because Filipe said I don't have enough time for it, but based on that perception of the next step, I was able to map some aspects that municipalities must observe in order to develop their systems. So in a municipality that has a centralized enrollment system but no wait list, the next step is to centralize a system with a wait list. So they must prioritize transparency and how to do that. Throughout my study, I bring up a few possibilities from some municipalities. I don't have an answer as to what a municipality should do because it's been proven. Because it's very hard to say what's going to work for all 5,570 municipalities in Brazil. So I bring up the points that municipalities should be mindful of so that they can make strides on their own. So in conclusion, my study doesn't have the answer as to what criteria should be given to municipalities to establish, but rather the importance of understanding prioritization of childcare services in the enrollment service and by serving the most vulnerable population. And this process must be concomitant with the creation of supply in childcare services. And it's important to understand from that perspective. Each municipality has their own complexity and its own enrollment system, and we can provide them with guidance. But we must bear in mind these clusters, these systems of enrollment, and understand that municipalities will go little by little until they reach profile number 4, where it's centralized with a wait list and a prioritization system. And that is it, right? I believe that's all the time I had. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope I'm helping with the debate, and I'm going to be here for final questions.
Maravilha, obrigado, Laísa. Deu 12 minutos e
Wonderful.
meio
Thank you,
tá
Laísa.
ótimo.
That was 12 minutes and 10 seconds. That was great.
Muito
Now,
obrigado.
that's all the time I had at Oxford, really. Claire taught me.
Não, olha, muito obrigado. Acho que foi ótima apresentação e eu vou
All
passar
right,
direto
Laísa, thank you.
para
It's been an excellent presentation, and now I'm going to give the floor to Maria Tereza, Secretary Maria Tereza. She's the leader of the Secretary of Education in Londrina, and she's going to give us her perspective from as to how she addresses these challenges in direct service of the population. I'm going to give you 10 minutes, and I'm going to remind you when you only have 5 minutes left and 1 minute left. Okay, great. So, I just wanted to let you know that I think it seems like Laísa was studying in Londrina, but and that makes me very happy because we have a centralized system with a wait list and criteria for prioritizing children in terms of their vulnerability. And one important thing you've mentioned is publicity. Before the work group, we wondered how we would make the waitlist public, and we decided to be careful with that because, for example, there are some women who are victims of violence and the child's name was there. That would be a problem, but we found a transparent way to do it. So we have a centralized system. But let me provide you with some context. I am from Londrina, a city in the state of Paraná, in the south of Brazil, and we have 560,000 inhabitants in our municipality. It is a wealthy region, yes, but there is a lot of inequality, and I've been working as the Secretary of Education since 2017. I took over a pioneer project of our mayor, which is a selection process via Vector Brazil. So I took over in January 2017 after a screening process, and when I took over in Londrina, things were chaotic when it came to childcare availability. That had been a huge debate during the election of 2016, and the mayor had taken over lots of commitments. So when I took over, I was trying to figure out the size, the dimension of this problem. And we had no idea really, because there was no management system for enrollment that was centralized. The press was our source of information. It wasn't the secretary. It wasn't the reports the Secretary of Education would produce. The press would say there were 11,000 children in a wait list. And I told the mayor, look, we cannot let that happen. If we have 11,000, we need another municipality here. We need to see how many people were born from 0 to 3 and see how many were enrolled. But we didn't have that piece of information. Now, we have 46,000 students enrolled. And it's important to notice that in Paraná, daycare is from 0 to 3 years of age. Early childhood is 0 to 5. And primary school is up to municipalities. So as of 5th grade, it's up to the state administration, not municipal one. So the municipal childcare and primary school is an exclusive responsibility of municipalities. So in 2017, we had this discussion that was just like Laísa walked us through. We had to create an enrollment center. So Priscila is actually familiar with this work. So we created a central, an enrollment center. So everybody who needed to be enrolled would go there to sign up. And that was a 2-month project. For the first 2 months of my management that now has been 8 years was based on prioritizing service. At first, we had 77 childcare centers, and now we have 95 childcare centers only for 0 to 3 years of age, full time. When I got here, it was part-time. Some of them were full-time, but you can't even work with the curriculum, with the syllabus program for that age range because some of them are full day, some of them are part-time. So just to give you an idea, that in 2017, the first year we took over, that enrollment center had already been implemented in another city of São Paulo state, which is Ourinhos, where I was a secretary. So I've created their enrollment center, and then when I moved to Londrina, I created the enrollment center in Londrina. And both in the state of São Paulo and the state of Paraná, the solution we came up with was, first, let's set the criteria. If we have 2 children and 1 spot, how do we prioritize? So we've defined the criteria along with social workers, with the public ministry. So we established criteria for the children to be enrolled. And then the ministry made a recommendation for the municipality to follow these criteria, and then we created the enrollment center. So we've educated and trained our public servants and said, forget everything you knew so far, we're going to start fresh. And we're going to look at the children who need it the most, because sometimes we would think, well, maybe that mother can be with the child. But we're talking about the children, not their family structure, not their relatives. And in 2016, in Londrina, there were over 600 litigation suits asking for enrollment in childcare. And then last year, we had 90, still a lot, but we started with 600. So we understand the supply for childcare is increasing, and most litigation happens for families who have access to justice, who are able to hire lawyers. With that being said, we are prioritizing children who need it the most, who lack access to it. So we made strides, and now we're going to conclude the year with 100 childcare centers. And I'd like to tell Danyel that I was very happy because we received the resources to build 2 schools, one childcare center and another school through the Growth Acceleration Program. So we are really appreciating that. I'm very happy with the news. I'm just going to walk through a few topics for criteria. Children in extreme vulnerability, suffering violence with members of the family who are drug abusers, and teenagers in socio-educational reintegration, and parents who are in prison. These children will definitely be enrolled. If a mother gets arrested, on the same day, the child will have an available position in the child care center. These are the criteria that we use in our municipality. And another aspect was to create a bill, and that's passed and turned into a law. So now we have the enrollment center that's guaranteed by law. It started as a recommendation, but then it became a law. And another important aspect is looking at the scenario in all municipalities. I look at my colleagues and say, No, there is no such a thing as a simple solution. It looks simple, right? What we did in Londrina was actually to organize the queue and say, okay, you're going, you're not. And that was all. But we must involve all the players, such as the lower house. So to organize the queue is not a simple task. And we can also tell that we've made a lot of progress in Londrina because we have a lot of access to services. That's an important step that you must consider and address. We need to talk about quality. We can't just enroll these children in a place that won't have the proper structure. And we have partnerships with civil society or entities, but we have teachers, we have supervisors, close supervision, and we have spreadsheets with the activities conducted by each teacher in each of the partner units, the partner centers. So the two things must go together. We've made a lot of improvement because back in the day, families would choose. I want a municipal childcare center. I don't want a partner childcare center. But there's no such differentiation now. We have the same level of investment and infrastructure. So there are many ways of expanding access. And here we're talking specifically about access, but we have to raise the bars together when it comes to quality too. And that is all, Filipe.
Maravilha. Você deixou até mais
Wonderful.
tempo pra gente.
And
Muito obrigado, foi
thank
ótima
you
fala. Eu acho que conecta muito bem com tudo
for
que a gente
keeping
está
to your
falando e com a
time.
fala da Clare
And
que vai entrar
yes,
agora.
everything you've said
O
is
que eu
very
falo
much
de Clare
aligned
também, que eu
to
falo da Clare, né?
this
Eu acho que
discussion and
a
to
sua
what Clare
colocação,
will be
secretária,
sharing
assim,
now. Yes,
mostra que, bom, a
Madam
Laísa está simplesmente falando de
Secretary, well,
organização da matrícula.
Laísa
Não,
talked
vamos só
about
organizar. Mas para
organizing the
eles, só
enrollment
organizar é
process, but we're
muito
going
mais
beyond
difícil do
that
que
now.
parece. Assim, é um desafio
Organizing
muito
alone is
maior
much
de
harder than it
implementação de uma
seems. It's quite a
política, né?
challenge when it
Então,
comes to
exatamente esse
implementing a
ponto que
policy.
conecta com a
So
fala da Clare,
this
que é
means
esses
to say that,
desafios para a
yes,
gente conseguir
your
efetivar, botar uma
ideas that you've
política
shared are in line with what
educacional,
Claire
alguma
will be
política
sharing
pública
now. We are
rodando,
talking about
né,
having one public
que é extremamente
policy
central.
on
Então,
education
só uma questão de logística agora, tá, gente?
for
A
all.
Clare, ela vai falar em
And
inglês.
now Claire
Então, para quem
will
precisar de
take the floor. She will
tradução,
be
a gente
speaking
tem
in English.
tradução
If you wish to
acontecendo
hear the
junto
interpretation,
com tradução
you may
simultânea. Como é que faz para
choose
acessar
Portuguese
essa tradução
language
simultânea?
in the
No
globe
Zoom,
icon
tem embaixo,
at the bottom of the
na parte de
screen.
baixo
So Zoom has
da
this
tela de
interpretation
vocês,
feature,
tem um globinho, está escrito
and
interpretation
you
ou
will find the
interpretação, tá?
interpretation
É só clicar nesse
globe
globinho, vai
icon.
aparecer três opções, um áudio
So
original,
once again, you will find
inglês
three
ou
options:
português.
original
Então,
audio,
para quem precisar de
English, or
tradução, é só
Portuguese.
jogar no português, que você vai pegar
So
o
if you
áudio
wish to hear the interpretation into
traduzido
Portuguese, please
pela
choose
equipe nossa
Portuguese in
de
the menu.
tradução que está aí.
And our interpretation
Eu
team
queria,
will
inclusive, agradecer
be
a equipe que está
translating
conosco. A gente
everything
está com duas
simultaneously.
pessoas. Vou pegar o nome delas aqui. O
So
Lucas e a
we
Lara,
are here
que
with
estão traduzindo
Lucas
para a
and
gente.
Lara,
Obrigado
our
por
interpreters.
estar aqui
Thank you
ajudando nesse
very much to
processo.
both of you for supporting us
E
with
aí eu vou passar, então,
interpretation.
a fala para a Clare.
Lucas
Clare,
and
mesmo
Lara
esquema,
from
tá?
Vox
Você tem 12
Interpreted.
minutos, eu vou te dar
So
o
Claire,
heads
you
up
have
aqui com
12 minutes
5
now
e
for
com 1
your
minuto, tá
intervention,
bom?
and I will let you know
Então,
at
a
5
palavra
and
está com você, Clare.
1 to
Obrigado.
go. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks so much, Filipe, and thank you for the opportunity to hear about early childhood education in Brazil today. I've learnt a lot from the participants already. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the What Works Hub for Global Education, which is a big new global partnership that we're running from the School of Government in Oxford. And I'll try and draw points of connection between our work and what I've heard discussed today. I think there are several points. It was mentioned early on about the importance of thinking through the implementation chain, and much of what I'm going to say is about implementation. But also, Maria just emphasized that whilst a lot of your focus is on access and on enrollment, once you have young children in centres, you need to make sure that there's quality of provision. And that's a lot of what we're focusing on in the What Works Hub is thinking about how to ensure that interventions that improve quality are actually implemented. So the What Works Hub is really focused on basic education rather than early childhood. And over the last few years, there's been a recognition that as we've started to meet enrollment goals for basic education in particular, there's a need to ensure that children, once they're enrolled in school, actually learn foundational skills. And research initiatives over the last decade or so have increasingly shown evidence on what kind of interventions work. So then the next frontier really is trying to understand what it takes to go from a proof of concept to quality implementation at scale with governments, so that those learnings can actually unlock foundational learning for millions of children. So what we're doing within the What Works Hub is really trying to build 3 pillars. So the first is recognizing that there's a lot of evidence already out there, and making sure that existing evidence is accessible, it's clear, and available to governments so they can use it immediately. So if someone asks, what's the best thing to improve pedagogical practice in my school, we can show them to the studies that have highlighted what we've learned about targeted instruction and structured pedagogy, for instance. So that's really an exercise around synthesizing evidence and curating it and translating it into an accessible form. Alongside that, there's a second pillar, which is where we're trying to both support the use of evidence, existing evidence, but also the generation of evidence within government itself. And so here we're working with governments on how to develop their own evidence labs. And I'll show you a global map shortly as to where those evidence labs that we're working with are. But less formally than that, how governments might strengthen their networks and how they might build capability to generate and use evidence within individuals and within institutions. And then the third pillar is the one that I'm more closely involved in as a researcher. We're undertaking primary research in partnership with governments to try and think through how to implement evidence-based reforms at scale. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about one particular research program, because I think it has a lot of points of connection to the issues in early childhood education in Brazil. So here are the countries we're working in. You'll see that Brazil is not one of them, and we're very open to discussions about how we might be able to partner going forward. But currently, our research is not focused in Latin America. So we have 12 countries listed here. The distinction between focus countries and project countries is not super important. But this audience, it's just kind of the scale of funding. But you'll see that there are embedded labs in a number of these countries where we're working with governments to establish those labs. And throughout our work across those 3 pillars, we're always trying to think about the classroom and what's happening in the classroom. So we're building research evidence, we're having government discussions, and then we're trying to see and understand how those government discussions feed through into policies getting adopted, and then those policies getting implemented so that we see change in the classroom. But all the way along, we're looking at the feedback. So what can we learn about the implementation process? What can we learn about the policy adoption process, and how we have dialogue with government through research to try and improve that change? So that's what the hub is trying to do. So let me tell you a little bit more about one particular study within Pillar 3 that I think has potential to have some learnings that could be of interest to this community. So what we're doing in this study is looking at a mechanism that's intended to drive innovation and improve implementation in basic education in Ghana and Sierra Leone. And I'll explain why I think is a novel mechanism as I go. So the motivation is, a very natural one in basic education. There are issues in both Ghana and Sierra Leone around there's still, student access issues, particularly for marginalized groups. And once those children are in school, making sure they stay in school, and once they're in school, making sure that they learn. And these, if you're in the kind of basic education community, are very, very familiar problems. But Ghana and Sierra Leone are taking a novel approach to tackling those challenges, and both have adopted the use of an outcomes fund mechanism. And there's $50 million that's been invested to date in this mechanism. So it's big. And I'm going to, in the next couple of slides, explain exactly how an outcomes fund mechanism works. But let me just say a little bit more by way of motivation before I get into the details of that. But roughly speaking, the rationale here is to try and create a market where you're opening up to NGOs, non-state providers, and creating a market to have impact in terms of affecting student learning. And the theory, and I've put this in italics because this is what we want to try and use the research to establish, in theory, is, or rather, I shouldn't say establish, but test. In theory, this creates incentives for non-state providers to innovate in the types of interventions they introduce and evolve and improve their implementation of those interventions. And that's because they're paid for outcomes, not for inputs. And so what we're doing as the hub is working with the two governments, the government of Ghana and the government of Sierra Leone, and also working with the Education Outcomes Fund, which is part of UNICEF, to try and understand whether using an outcomes fund mechanism does or does not improve student outcomes. And the emphasis here is on the how and the why. What can we learn from seeing this mechanism at play? And one of the reasons I think this is relevant for this community is that the Education Outcomes Fund is supporting other governments in lower middle income countries to adopt an outcomes fund mechanism in early childhood education. They're at work in sub-Saharan Africa at the moment, talking through whether this kind of mechanism would be appropriate for ECE. So who does what in an outcomes fund mechanism? Well, forgive me if there are participants on this call who already know what outcomes fund mechanisms are, but there may be some who don't. So let me just spell it out in a picture. So what an outcomes fund does is it brings together multiple parties, a government, so either the government of Ghana or the government of Sierra Leone in these two cases. There's government of Ghana on the left and government of Ghana, Sierra Leone on the right. It's supported by EUF and international donors such as the World Bank and the UK's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office and other international donors. Brings government together with service providers who are typically NGOs and social investors. So they all play distinct roles. So in Ghana, we have a fund that is trying to achieve two things. It's trying to get children who are currently not enrolled in school, out of school children, into schools. And then it's trying to get both those newly enrolled children and the children who are already in those schools learning and developing their foundational learning. So improving their numeracy and improving their literacy. So what the government did was the government identified the schools most in need of support, measured outcomes, or is measuring outcomes, is regulating, and then is paying the NGOs and their potential investor partnerships for the outcomes that are achieved. What the social investors do is they provide upfront funding for the NGOs and they bear the risk. So they provide the funding and they know they'll only get paid if outcomes are delivered. And then the NGOs are the ones on the ground who are actually delivering and implementing the intervention. So either integrating out of school children into schools or supporting the school and teachers to improve learning. And the system, the scheme in Sierra Leone is very similar. I won't go through that. So that's what an outcomes fund mechanism is. How were the service providers selected? So they were selected, and this is where the market idea comes in. The NGOs were invited to bid to win contracts to deliver outcomes in geographic lots. So to deliver student learning in geographic lots. The lots in Ghana were divided up into 7 areas, mainly in the north, because that's where most of the out-of-school children, or that's the area with the highest prevalence of out-of-school children. And what the bidders did was they described the type of interventions they planned to introduce in schools and with communities. These were mostly focused around teacher professional development, pedagogical training, such as teaching at the right level, targeted instruction and community engagement. So they had a bid document, and then which would say what they're going to do and how much impact they expect to have. The governments then awarded the contracts. They awarded 6 lots in the first instance, not the lot 7, these ones, but the first 6 lots to 3 providers in Ghana, so 2 lots per provider. And then the government of Sierra Leone did the same in Sierra Leone, where there are 5 lots and 5 separate providers won the contracts there. So that's how providers were selected. And then how they're being paid as the name suggests, on the basis of outcomes. Except in year 1, because there was a sort of lead-in inception period, they received expenses-based payments for the activities they carried out, and that has now switched to purely being based on the basis of the impact that they achieve in terms of student learning. And the way in which, and this is crucial, the way in which the impact is evaluated is via a randomized controlled trial. And that's run at lot level. So 6 separate different RCTs in Ghana and 5 in Sierra Leone. And the basic idea is to compare student learning between the treatment schools, where service providers are working, with student learning in control schools. And if you see a difference, you make a payment based on that difference. So what do we hope to learn from this, and why do I think it might be relevant for this community? Well, the system itself is going to document the impact of providers on student learning. But what we hope our study will do is document what was being implemented by providers, because at the moment, the only thing that governments know is what was in the bid document. But we already know from our research that what's actually being implemented is a little bit different because of challenges that have arisen, and the fact that things they learn on the job, the service providers, and they evolve and innovate. We also hope to establish why those interventions did or did not improve student learning by looking at what we call intermediate outcomes. So looking at how teachers have changed their pedagogical practice, how teacher knowledge has changed. And then we also hope to look at the impact of the interventions on outcomes beyond numeracy and literacy, including things like socio and emotional learning. So all of those things are things that the government would not know without the study. And the aim is to provide recommendations on the basis of that study as to what are the interventions or best practices to take to scale. And we think this is relevant both for Ghana and Sierra Leone, but also for a global community. And this is where I'd link back. I think some of what we will learn about what providers do to try and drive access and try and drive enrollment and retention could have genuine insights for early childhood education in Brazil. Moreover, there's the possibility of using a similar mechanism like this, as is going to be tried in sub-Saharan Africa in Brazil. So I will stop there. Thank you, Filipe.
Muito obrigado, Clare. Foi ótima.
Thank you very much, Clare, for this wonderful presentation and extremely interesting strategy. I do not know if it's the same in Brazil. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
das licitações,
when it comes to the
baseado
bids
no resultado, né?
and outcomes based funds. Well,
ideia,
this
e fico curioso,
such an
inclusive,
interesting
de ver,
idea.
O teste disso, da avaliação,
And I'm
não
very
necessariamente da
interested to
implementação,
learn the
dessa
results.
estratégia, que é uma estratégia
Well,
diferente,
what are the outcomes of the strategy? It's
processo
such a different,
de licitação,
unique,
né, do bidding.
and novel
Muito
strategy,
legal,
right?
Clare, obrigado.
With this bidding process. Thank you very much,
Então, a gente
Clare,
vai passar agora
for sharing
para a
this
parte
experience with us. We
de
will now
perguntas e participação da audiência.
open the Q&A
A gente
session.
recebeu
We
algumas
will take
perguntas aqui, já
questions
estou vendo,
from
o
our
pessoal já está mandando aqui para mim
participants.
também no
The
chat da
questions are
comunicação
also
interna
coming
nossa
in
aqui.
through the chat
Então, eu vou convidar as pessoas,
feature.
algumas pessoas
So I will
para fazer as perguntas,
invite
só que a gente
some
passou
of you
pouquinho
to
do
open
tempo,
your
então agora a gente está
microphones
faltando
and ask your
muito pouco tempo para
questions.
terminar o
We
horário
are, of course,
combinado
pressed
dessa
for
sessão.
time because
Faltam 5
our
minutinhos,
session
mas eu vou
will
abrir para
end
uma ou
in
duas
5
perguntas só.
minutes time, so
E aí a
we'll have time to take 1 or 2
tentar
questions, I
ficar dentro
believe,
do tempo. Eu queria, então, só pedir para que,
before we
quando a
conclude.
gente pedir às pessoas, fazer uma pergunta bem direta,
We will
para a
ask
gente
you
poder
to
escutar
make
vocês
clear
e ter dar a oportunidade
questions, if you may,
dos panelistas
to allow
responderem,
more people
tá?
to ask
Eu vou
questions and
aproveitar aqui
to
para
have their questions answered.
agradecer o apoio da equipe de todos, que está tudo
tudo
ajudando a gente nesse processo aqui, no
I
nome
really
da Daniela
appreciate the
Mendes, que está
team
ajudando
from Todos
toda a
pela Educação
organização
who are
do
helping
painel e a
us
organização aqui por
organizing the
trás,
panel, and
para que a gente consiga
also
organizar isso, e agradecer também
the
aqui a equipe nossa
backstage
mesmo do
and
Human
our
Program,
own
no nome da
team
Lia,
in
da
the
Júlia e
Lemon
da Lisa, aqui, que
program on
estão
behalf
com a
of
gente. Muito obrigado
Laísa and
pelo apoio que a gente
Julia.
dá aqui.
Thank you so
A
much
Laura
for the
Ogando,
help.
então, mesmo
Now,
isso, tá, gente? Mas a Laura Ogando deixou uma
Laura
pergunta para a gente,
Ogando
só que ela
submitted a
saiu, que ela
question,
perguntando
but
sobre a
she
questão da
left.
qualidade,
She was asking
mas aí
about
eu acho que as
the
falas
matter
já
of
contemplaram,
quality,
tá?
but I
Então eu vou
believe
tirar essa pergunta aqui, mas
the
que aqui a gente já tocou
panelists have
nessa
already
questão da qualidade.
covered
E aí eu
this
vou
topic
pedir,
since we have talked about quality here.
para
Now, I'm
Cláudia, para
going
a
to
professora Cláudia
ask
Costin, a gente consegue liberar
Claudia
ela aqui, gente?
Costin.
Para ela
I
poder entrar e
believe
fazer
we
a
can
pergunta
promote
dela,
her
por
to
favor. Depois
panelist,
a gente
right?
vai
So she
pedir
can
uma
ask her
outra,
question.
vai ter mais uma pergunta, e aí eu
And
vou
then we
passar para o
will
encerramento.
have time for
Vamos
one
lá.
more question and then the
Ó, a
closing
Cláudia já está
remarks.
aqui. Cláudia, se você
So
puder
Claudia is
liberar
already here. So if
áudio e
we
o seu vídeo
can
para a gente.
enable her audio and video
Aí,
Bom,
so
muito
she
bem.
can ask her
Bom,
question.
muito
Oh,
rapidamente,
very
muito
briefly,
obrigada pelas
thank you very
excelentes
much for the excellent
apresentações.
keynote
Estive em
speeches.
Londrina, vi que o que
I've
a Maria
been in
Tereza falou
Londrina and
é
I've seen
verdade
what
e,
Maria
inclusive,
Teresa said, and
discutimos
that is
os
true.
critérios
And
quando eu
we have
estive aí para
actually
falar com os
discussed the
professores.
criteria when I was there to
E
talk to the
gostei muito
teachers.
das três
And
apresentações.
I
Eu
really
vou ser
enjoyed all
objetiva
the
para permitir
presentations,
tempo
and I'm going
para
to
os
be
outros.
straightforward so as to have
Três
enough time
pontos
for other
rápidos.
questions. Two quick
Deles,
points.
eu acho que
One of
faz
them
todo
is,
sentido, Laísa, como
I
você
believe
bem
it makes a lot
colocou,
of sense,
você
Laísa, as you put it
criar
yourself,
critérios enquanto você
to
não consegue
create
universalizar, pelo menos
criteria
atender
while you
completamente a demanda, ao
cannot
mesmo
go
tempo em que você
fully
vai ampliando
universal to
o número
meet
de
the demand
creches, como
as
a
you
Maria Tereza
expand the
mostrou que ela está
number of
fazendo.
childcare centers, like Maria
A
Teresa
questão
has been
que
doing
fica
in her
enquanto a
municipality.
gente não
But the question
consegue
left
colocar
is,
todos, em especial
while
não
we
consegue colocar
cannot
todos os mais
enroll
vulneráveis,
all
o
of the
que
children,
a gente
especially the
faz?
most
E
vulnerable
daí
ones,
eu acho
what
que
do
Boa
we do?
Vista dá um exemplo para o país.
And I think
Eles
Boa
não
Vista sets an
conseguem
example
a
for
capital
the rest
mais
of the country.
pobre do país,
It's the poorest capital
se,
city in
se
the
não a mais
country.
pobre, a segunda mais pobre do
If not the
país.
poorest,
E
the
eles
second
fizeram o
poorest
seguinte,
capital
priorizaram
in the
Bolsa
country. And
Família, como
here's
a
what
Maria
they did.
Tereza
They
também fez.
prioritized
Eles não
Bolsa
adotaram
Familia
esses
welfare
outros
program
critérios, Maria
members,
Tereza, mas
and they
eles
have not adapted,
priorizaram o
not
atendimento de
used
2
the
e
other
3
criteria, but they
anos, que é onde a
prioritized
pesquisa mostra que você tem mais
child
impacto.
care services
E
for 2 to 3
fizeram
years of
outras
age, which
políticas
is where
públicas,
study shows
ações
there's most impact.
complementares,
And they've created
como a
other public
saúde
policies
e
for
assistência
complementary actions
social e
through
escolas de
healthcare,
parentalidade, que é um
social
outro
work,
tema que
and
me é muito
quality
caro. Quer
schools,
dizer, eu acho que
which is a theme that's
escolas de
very dear to me.
parentalidade, visitação domiciliar da saúde e assistência
Parental
social
schools and
pode ser um
also
caminho interessante.
visits
E eu queria
from
saber da
social
opinião de
workers
vocês,
could be
inclusive da Clare,
a good way to go.
a
And I would
respeito
like to
dessa
hear your
integração das
thoughts
políticas
about this
públicas
integration
nessa
of
direção,
public
enquanto não
policies
pelo menos
in that
enquanto a gente não
direction,
consegue
at
chegar a
least
todos. E
while we
depois também,
cannot reach
essa
all
é a
of
minha
the
pergunta.
children.
Desculpe gastar
And
tempo com ela, Filipe.
that's my question.
Obrigado, Cláudia. Ótima pergunta, ótima
Thank you,
colocação.
Claudia.
Já vou
It's
partir
an
direto para a
excellent
gente
question.
responder, porque o tempo está
We will
bem
answer
apertado para
it
todo mundo. A gente
immediately
tem outra
because
agenda
we're
aqui, tem gente que tem
tied
voo
on
depois, então
schedule.
vamos lá.
Lots of people have flights after this session, so let's get to it.
Professora Cláudia,
May I
obrigada
address this
pela
question
pergunta.
then?
Antes de te
Professor
responder, eu queria
Claudia,
dizer
thank
que
you
durante
for
o
your
processo de
question.
estudo
Before
também eu conversei com a
answering it,
Jaqueline
I'd
e
like to
Emília
say that
sobre
before
o
the study,
programa de
I
qualificação
talked to
direta para
Jacqueline and
infância, que também
Amelia
serviu de
about
grande
the
inspiração para o meu
direct
estudo.
qualification program for
E
early
essa pergunta é
childhood, and
algo
that's
que
a
está me
great
motivando
inspiration for
agora,
my
inclusive. Eu
study.
estava
And this question
recentemente estudando sobre
has
o Reach
actually been
Up and
motivating
Learn,
me
Reach Up and Learn,
now. I've been
a
looking
experiência da
into
Jamaica,
Reach
né,
Up
que
and
também
Learn,
serviu como uma
the experience
experiência,
of
uma
Jamaica.
inspiração do
That
Criança
was also an
Feliz aqui no Brasil.
inspiration for
E eu
Brazil.
entendo a importância desses
And
programas
I
também
understand the importance
intersetoriais,
of
tem
these
questão
intersectorial
de visita
programs,
domiciliar,
such
mas eu tenho
as
a impressão, eu não posso
household
dizer ainda com
visits by
dados, quando me
social
aprofundei
workers.
academicamente,
And the
teoricamente em relação
impression
a isso,
I have,
mas
of
tenho a
course, I
impressão
need to
que
look into
não
the data
substitui a
more in
socialização, o
depth, but
desenvolvimento
I I understand that does not replace the
Então, são processos que podem
socialization
vir
and educational
concomitantemente
program. So these are projects that can come together, and Boa Vista is an excellent example of it. During my master's, I spoke to the mayor of Boa Vista about a case study with her experience, and that's a significant progress they've made with the intersectorial policies. But what I can say academically speaking now is this is a question that's been driving me in the post-analysis of the report, looking into childcare services. Thank you, Laísa. Maria Teresa, do you have anything to add in that context? Well, as Laísa said at first, the window of opportunity is opened with the elections of 2024. We've looked into doing this, Professor, with the queue of students that are still waiting for enrollment. So we've visited them at least with social workers to see how they were doing while they weren't able to be enrolled. So this is something for the next administration, but this is even more important for those who are not enrolled at the moment. Okay, great. And now we have two more questions for Clare, and Clare has already addressed one of them in the Q&A, as you can see. So you can read the answer for yourselves, and this is great. And we can keep the conversation going. So that would be our homework. And another question, which is from Cesel. Just for the sake of time, Cesel, can you please send us your email address, and we will reply via email to you, just in respect of everybody's time. I'm now going to give the floor to Priscila, so she can make final remarks. But I really appreciate you taking the time to participate, and for all your time and engagement, and for sticking around to this time. Thank you very much. Thank you, Filipe. Thank you all who participated and submitted questions, and Claudia, who's part of the work group, all the experts and secretaries, and Clare, who's such a reference for us at Todos pela Educação, a reference in early childhood for the efficacy and implementation of policies. So it's been great to hear you and Laísa, everyone. It's been a very important discussion for the report and for building these proposals for integrated policies for early childhood education. There's something that's become even clearer to me today. Any integrated policy must have intersectorial interactions very well aligned. I'm sorry, I'm hearing some recording notice here, but that's it. Integration depends on intersectorial policies, and this integration for early childhood in education is extremely important. We cannot replace integration with the quality of intersectorial policy. So the idea is, how do we improve the verticals by creating these horizontal lines of integration? So I really appreciate you and your contribution with the maturing of this discussion in Brazil. So thank you very much. Have a great one, whatever time zone you're in. I've learned a lot from you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I wish you an excellent rest of your day. And just a small observation, we will have another round of this webinar further ahead in Oxford. So we will keep the conversation going. Thank you very much. Thank you.